we want to get into basically, what's been going on in the NBA as far as the scoring surge. So we've seen 40, 50, 60-point games all over the place. Colin, I think you mentioned earlier that, we're at one of our all-time high league average points per game numbers that's maintained. It's held since the beginning of the season to now. Pretty incredible numbers here. So, Seth, essentially what me and Colin wanted to do here is like get your thoughts on this explosion here. You thought that at the beginning of the season it might not hold for a variety of reasons, and they're very solid reasons. Obviously, it has held, and it's just been kind of continuing to build as the season's gone along. So when it comes to the reasons as to why this has been a thing, what's been driving not just the introduction of league high scoring, but the maintaining over the course of the season, there's a lot of different factors in this, rule changes, the talent level of players, just different play styles and things like that. But what comes to your mind first when you're thinking about the reasons as to why these numbers have been so substantial and why they've held over the course of 70 games at this point in the season?
Sure. So the first thing is part of it is the league is playing a little faster than it has. Like the last couple of years, the pace has been gradually increasing. So just in terms of point totals, like we're getting 3-4 extra possessions a game than we were a couple of years ago. So that's part of it. But the per possession efficiency, I think there's a combination of things, and I think we've probably hit a tipping point of a confluence of factors that have suddenly made it impossible to guard in the NBA. So you mentioned the skill level of player, the deployment of players. Every team basically understands, just to a large degree, spacing the floor, using the 3-point line to make the defense cover the maximum area possible. Something that's really started to happen more over the last couple of years is we see teams that don't just have one ball handle on the floor. They have 3, they have 4, they have 5 guys who maybe they're not like point guard skill level players, but 5 guys who can catch the ball, make a play with the ball, who can punish a mismatch, who can drive a closeout, who can shoot a 3 if necessary, who can cut an offense. Like, so there aren't the analogy I've started using recently is for a long time, NBA teams, if you had to choose, who do you want on the floor? Do you want Torrey Craig or George Niang on the floor? I think those are reasonably comparable players, one of whom is a very good, like one of whom's skews towards the defensive, one of whom skews towards the offensive, or skews towards offensively talented. I'm not saying I want to say George Niang is offensive. And it used to be, I think, 20 years ago, every team except the Suns, basically, is picking the defensive guy. A couple years ago it was maybe 50-50. Now it's, aside from Phoenix, and that's just because that's who they got on their roster. I think every team is taking the offense, is choosing to play the offensive guy. Now that does the 2 things. One, that makes offenses harder to guard because there's 5 guys you got to guard. One of the big worries you have about, like, say, Philadelphia going to the playoffs is PJ Tucker's an offensive passenger, and I don't know if that works anymore. But there are more lineups where you have like 5 guys who can do things, so that makes it harder to guard. Plus, the choice that you're choosing George Niang and not Torrey Craig means that's one less good defender on the floor, and a weaker defender is there. So it's those things kind of spiraling together to create a sort of a continuing cycle of buckets. And then on top of that, I think that NBA defenses haven't adjusted at all to this sort of multi-skilled, multi-ball handler environment. It's my podcast partner on Nerder, she wrote, Modakil likes to talk about this a lot. Defenses are very predictable. Like NBA defenses, like, okay, if we get the ball to this spot on the floor, the help will come from this direction. This will be the rotation. So dribble there, pass, open shot there, like clockwork. Yeah. And, in the playoffs, when teams can start to game plan for pet actions and stuff like that, those rotations become a little less rote. They can do some stuff to slow the ball movement down a little bit, so it's not as sort of just point to point open shot. But over 82 games, like, teams are just kind of trying to get through the 82 games, and so they're running their defensive stuff. And you go, well, against this team, if we set an angle pick and roll and the guy helps off the corner, and then we we drive and kick and swing, open three every time. Or if the guy doesn't help, then it's a lot. It's just so easy to create these advantages where the defense is in rotation.
And that was going to be my question. What do you think that there's going to be some kind of defensive revolution where the strategy just in general is going to change, where it can just take place through the 82 games, and it's going to be their defense, and it's going to just adjust. They're going to be able to adjust.
I like what I've seen from OKC this year. There's just sort of the two avenues. One is sort of the switch everything.
Yeah.
And in some ways that actually spurred, I think, the got to have multiple ball handlers, because it was, we'll just switch and then you can't get the advantage, and then they got to throw the ball to the guy who can't do anything, who's the screener. Well, what if we put another ball handler on the floor then instead? Now we've switched, and suddenly your 6'1" point guard is guarding 6'8" George Niang.
Right.
Okay, if that when that was, I don't know, Montrezl Harrell or Paul Reed or something like that, it's like, okay, fine. Try to back him down and see if that's good offense. But now that it's a guy who can, dribble, pass, and shoot, it's a tougher thing.
Mm-hmm.
But so like Boston, Golden State have the personnel to like make that work.
Mm-hmm.
I think from a more traditional, and even they have a lot of switchability, but they use it in different ways. It's like Oklahoma City, I think, is the team that I've noticed that has done a consistently good job of sort of staying home early in the shot clock, not giving up those sort of rotations, and then later in the shot clock being very aggressive with switching and trapping and stuff like that. So almost making, as free flowing as offenses have become, with multiple players able to be creative and do stuff, they're almost bringing a little bit of that to the defensive side of the ball. And it helps if you have, a bunch of 6'8" long arm guys. Like even like Josh Giddey might not be the fastest guy in the world, but he's enormous, and that helps. Yeah.
I mean, he's 6'7", and I like how you use OKC.
6'7". I would take the over on that. He is big.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say definitely. I mean, he's a big guard. Like you look at him on the court. I think they mentioned it during the broadcast last night. I was watching OKC versus the Clippers, and he had a shot over Paul George. I think it was like a short floater from the left block, and it banked in. And people are like, I mean, Giddey is not a small guy. You look at him, and it's like, okay, he's not the most athletically gifted, like you said, but I mean, he can get a shot over some pretty tall players. That floater he's starting to develop. So I like how you used OKC as an example, because I noticed last night as well that they were playing Jalen Williams. So not J-Dub, J-Will. So the bigger guy, we got the second rounder from Arkansas. They played him at center. And I think they're leaning into that in order to kind of spur on that defensive strategy you're talking about when it comes to switch everything. Because everybody, including Shea, they're between 6'5" and 6'8", I believe. And you got Dort out there, the torture chamber. So it's like you kind of cover a lot of holes if you're playing that way.
And then the other thing they did is, I've just talked about switching or whatever, but then also their teams are so another thing that can happen is teams are so willing to give up the soft switch and let you're playing the Mavericks, Luka's going to run a billion pick and rolls. If you're going to soft switch, which guy do I want guarding me is basically what you're asking, letting him ask. I mean, then you look at OKC in the last possession last night, and how many times did they try to set screens for Kawhi to get Dort off of Kawhi? And they're just like
4 or 5 screens.
No, we're not switching. No. And that's teams just being a little, you don't want this guy guarding your best player? Well, we do want him guarding your best player then. And so we're going to stick to that. And I think, teams being a little just more attentive to that, whether that's something you can do over 82 games, whether that's a good argument for shortening the season in and of itself, but we don't need to get into that here, I don't think. But yeah.